Hi, Dr. Pastor.
Hi, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Good. LA traffic.
Gotta love it. So glad you could join us. And for everybody who is logging on right now, we're going to give it a few minutes and get started here shortly. All right, well, I think we should go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone. Let me stop sharing my screen. So, good morning, all, and welcome to our second annual Ed Talk hosted by First Five Santa Barbara County. I'm so happy you all could join us, especially as we take this year's event virtual. While we always value the energy of connecting in person, we're really excited about the opportunity to broaden our reach and bring these important and timely conversations to an even wider audience. For those who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Brianna Dunn, and I serve as the Communications Manager and Public Information Officer for First Five. I'm joined today on screen by our Executive Director, Wendy Sims-Moten, and our Deputy Director, Michelle Robertson, both of whom you'll hear from in just a few minutes. Rounding out our on-screen team, we also have Lexi Brenner, our Special Projects Coordinator, who will be helping make sure that everything runs smoothly on the tech front. And of course, we have our keynote speaker here, Dr. Manuel Pastor, and you'll be hearing a lot from him and learning more about him in just a few minutes. Many of you joining us today are already familiar faces. I had the opportunity to take a peek at our registration list, and so I'm really excited that we have funded partners, county colleagues, First Five colleagues, friends, and maybe even a few family members. But for those of you who may be new to First Five, let me take a moment to briefly introduce you to who we are and what we do. First Five Santa Barbara County, or the Children and Families Commission, is part of a statewide initiative established in 1999 after the passage of Proposition 10, or lovingly Prop 10, which directed tobacco tax revenues to support early childhood development in all 58 California counties. Our mission is to mobilize and integrate our communities to help children thrive in kindergarten and in life, and we focus on children from prenatal through age 5, the most critical years for brain development, and work as a funder, partner, convener, catalyst, and advocate to support families and strengthen the systems that serve them. Ed Talk was created as a space to step back and take a 30,000-foot view, if you will, of the systems that shape early childhood experiences. It's about thinking big, examining the challenges and opportunities in our work, and sparking dialogue around how we can continue to evolve and strengthen these systems. Even if you think your work doesn't directly tie to children and families, I'm willing to bet that it does in some way. In a time of uncertainty and disruption, our hope is that today's conversations leave you not only informed, but also inspired, and that you walk away with fresh insights, renewed energy, and practical tools to help advance equity and positive change in your own communities and circles of influence. With that, I have a couple of logistical announcements before we hop into our presentations. We will be holding a live Q&A session after Dr. Pastor's presentation concludes. You can enter any questions that arise throughout the presentation at any point in the Q&A function located in the Zoom toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will be holding all questions until the end. So if we seem like we're ignoring your questions, don't worry, we'll get to it at the end or towards the end of the webinar. For copies of the slides and additional resources, please visit our EdTalk Hub located at our website, first5sbc.org. There's a banner across the top of the homepage, and you can click that and it'll take you there. You can also access the link through the page where you found the link to join this webinar. As you've seen, the webinar will be recorded and it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channel within the next couple of weeks. Please feel free to share that out. So I think that does it for me. So I'm going to introduce our next speaker, Wendy Sims Moten. Wendy's professional and personal calling has been to prepare students for success from an early age. And I know many of you on here know Wendy personally and can attest that she has been a pillar of the County of Santa Barbara for more than 28 years and has been with First Five Santa Barbara County for 25 of those, starting out as their business manager, overseeing its fiscal systems and accountability, operations, and human resources, leading her to becoming our current executive director. Wendy is deeply invested in the growth and prosperity of her community and its residents. Her civic engagements are diverse and numerous, but to give you just a little taste, she's the former chair and member of the Santa Barbara Unified School District Board of Trustees, board member of Cause Action Fund, and board chair of Gateway Educational Services, again, just to name a few. When she steps back from her civic duties, Wendy enjoys quality time with her adult son, reading, watching tennis, acting, and singing. So please join me in a warm welcome for Wendy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brianna. Just let me give it up for Brianna. She is everything Ed Talk, everything behind giving this up. So give her a hand and thank you, Brianna, so much for working out and helping us get together and present this wonderful opportunity to get into community and conversation with our community. I am truly proud to be the executive director of First Five Santa Barbara County. Without a doubt, that's my passion to do it. And I get to play as well. So I also want to take this time to let you, this is a community conversation, get in it. As you're hearing things and questions come up, as Brianna said, go ahead and put those in the chat. We'll make sure that we'll try to get to those so that we're also making sure that we're in conversation together. And we're coming at a time when the space and the pace of change feels relentless. A lot of things are coming at us differently and all the time. And certainly when uncertainty has become a part of our daily lives. And yet, it is moments and opportunities like these that our collective response matters most. Because the question before us isn't just how we respond to disruption, it's how we respond with intention, with the shared goal of building equitable and just communities where everyone, especially our youngest children and their families, can thrive. Today's Ed Talk is about shared responsibility, how we do it together. It's about coming together across roles, sectors, and lived experiences to ask the hard questions, challenge the status quo, and lift up the strategies that are making a difference right here in our county and beyond. You're going to hear from my girl, our deputy director, Michelle Robertson. That is a tongue twister. You know, that's why you have to get started early with language and literacy so you can get it all together, you know. She's going to lead us through a very thoughtful exploration of how societal disruptions impact emotional well-being and how self-regulation, play, and wonder can foster resilience during times of constant change and stress. Her presentation will highlight how curiosity and creativity can connect us to a sense of balance, hope, and possibility. Then you're going to hear also from our keynote speaker, Dr. Manuel. Welcome again. We so love to hear you. So glad that you're back and joining us here in Santa Barbara County. He will provide insights on navigating disruption within our communities, sharing real-world examples of strategies that advance equity and strengthen systems. He'll offer practical tools and inspiration to help you take meaningful action in your own organizations and communities. At a time when many are feeling overwhelmed, we'll explore how to keep the work moving forward with intention, sustainability, and compassion. Whether you are a nonprofit leader, an educator, a student, a parent, a policymaker, or someone who simply cares deeply about their community, you have a role in this work, and we invite you to be a part of that. And we are so grateful that you're here. So thank you on behalf of our First Five Santa Barbara County team. Thank you for joining us. And we're proud to host this conversation. And we're excited to explore what the possibilities are together. So sit back and relax. Not we're going to take off on a plane. We want you to sit back and be open to what you may hear throughout the day. And with that, I'm pleased again to introduce our first speaker, Michelle Robertson. Michelle has been a vital leader in early childhood and education in Santa Barbara County for over 25 years. And we've had the great fortune to hear its first five to work part of those years with her, also having to serve with school boards with her. So great partner in this work. Her experiences as an educator and public servant has provided her with a deep understanding of societal factors that impact children's success, making her essential to our mission. In addition to her decade of work with First Five Santa Barbara County, she has led early education and support divisions at both Santa Barbara and Carpinteria Unified School Districts, and served on the Carpinteria Unified School for 6 years, and has taught multiple local colleagues. In 2015, Michelle was recognized for her work in social justice and equity by receiving the Educator of the Year Award from the Santa Barbara chapter of Anti-Defamation League, and her graduate work focuses on measuring cultural proficiency in preschool classroom. So she's in the work, all the way knee deep. Michelle finds joy in she finds it in analyzing data and using it to transform hearts and minds for change. She is passionate about ensuring every young child has access to what they need to thrive and imagine a future where true equity is a reality. So please, with my tongue-tied things today, please extend a warm welcome to Michelle, and thank you. We look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. I am going to give a little talk about children, because at First Five, children are the focus of everything we do. So I just want to start out the morning by saying you're not crazy, right? I don't know about you, but I've been feeling kind of exhausted for the last year or so. And no matter what your political affiliation or what lens you see society through, the world is experiencing a massive shift from the status quo. Such events affect the way we exist on this planet in physical, emotional, and spiritual ways that are pretty unprecedented for most of us. So we are not crazy. This is a pivotal time in our nation's history, and there is a need for some collective sense-making about what is going on around us. With the daily cascade of challenges and threats to what we thought was the foundation of the American spirit, it only exasperates our dysregulation. And if it is hard on us as adults, think about how it is for young children with little to no experience on how to articulate and work through what they are feeling. This will most often in young children come out in behavior, emotional response, and ability to focus. So this is a super strange time for adults and for children. Dysregulation is defined as an inability to control or regulate emotional responses to what is happening around you. This happens to everyone, every single one of us from time to time. Another more common word for this is stress. Some stress can be good for us and it pushes us to improve. But there is also toxic stress, which can cause hyperreaction that becomes the regular state of being, and that can cause all kinds of health and societal problems down the line. When we see our children acting out these hyperreactions, being those mirrors of society, we know that things are not optimal. So what do you need to do to combat the stress in our lives so that our children, the future of all, learn how to navigate the world around them? We need to start to reach self-regulation. If you know anything about brain development and brain functionality, you know that social and emotional development needs to occur before higher level critical thinking can happen. As an adult, think about a very stressful day. The dysregulation that you feel will often make your thoughts cloudy, and the neural connections needed to solve problems start backfiring. This also can trigger our flight, fight, or freeze response. So for me, allowing myself space and time to be quiet, to access nature, reflect and journal, or create something artistic will give me just enough of a break from the stressors to get me back to myself. In other words, bringing back a sense of wonder to my life will also bring back a sense of hope and magic that even us adults need to exist. The phrase, "this too shall pass," is cliche but true. The pendulum of life swings back and forth, sometimes forcefully and sometimes subtly. We have both positive and negative emotions because that is balance. Often we want to dismiss the negative thoughts and not sit with them, but by doing so, we are not validating ourselves or figuring out how to make sense of things happening around us. So in our work here at First Five, you've heard us say this before, play is the work of a child. But what is the actual product of that work? From an article written by Joanna Gaines, she states, "Watch the way a kid moves through the world, and it can feel like now you see everything in color. How they stop to pick the lonely flower, point out that birds fly in patterns, search far and wide until they found the mighty elusive ant colony." This article reminded me that it is as if children were made for discovery and to ask questions, and that wonder is the purpose of life, and that to find beauty and meaning in anything, you must start with curiosity and awe. Only then can children make meaning and reach their full potential. As I reflected more, I remembered that this doesn't just apply to children, but also to adults. Play doesn't stop at a certain age. Play is how humans make sense of the world, find meaning and purpose, and contribute to the positivity rather than the negativity. So with that, as you listen to our keynote speaker today, I invite you to join the Wonder Club and follow this honor code of play that is written in the book, "The World Needs the Wonder You See." First, look up. Always keep your eyes peeled for anything extraordinary. Lean in. Don't be afraid to get a closer look at something that catches your eye. Bend low. The best view often means getting on your hands and knees. You won't believe what you see. Reach for new heights. Stay curious about making new discoveries. One thing we know for sure is that wonder is never in short supply. So in conclusion, I will share two quotes from Paulo Freire, who was a Brazilian philosopher and educator whose life spanned the 20th century. I must have read about 5 of his books in graduate school as we studied equity and social justice and examined the factors that contribute to some succeeding and others that don't. I chose these 2 quotes here to end with because I couldn't choose. They both spoke to me in the moment. The first, education does not transform the world. Education changes people, and people change the world. And second, knowledge emerges only through invitation and reinvention, through the restless, impatient continuing hopeful inquiry human beings pursue in the world, and with each other. So I leave you with this. Be a part of what allows the human spirit to create, to invent, to innovate, as the world that is yet to be created by our children is the world that will sustain us as human beings and with each other. So I thank you, and I'd like to now introduce our keynote speaker. All right. Dr. Manuel Pastor is a distinguished professor of sociology and American studies and ethnicity and director of the Equity Research Institute at the University of Southern California. He has dedicated his research and career to understanding the intersection of economic growth, social equity, and community empowerment. He has authored and co-authored many books, including Solidarity Economics, Why Mutuality and Movements Matter. You can see the full list on the EdTalk Hub on our website of his many publications, and we highly encourage you to explore those. As a dedicated public intellectual, Dr. Pastor speaks frequently and contributes opinion pieces to a variety of media outlets. A member of the California Governor's Council on Economic Advisors and the California Racial Equity Commission, he previously served on California's COVID-era Task Force on Business and Jobs Recovery and as a public member of the state's Strategic Growth Council. In 2022, Pastor was elected to the American Academy of the Arts and Sciences for his work in public affairs and public policy. This is my fourth time hearing Dr. Pastor, and I am excited every time. In 2023, Dr. Pastor presented at the First Five Annual Results Fair, and the feedback from the audience was, please bring him back. So we are excited that Dr. Pastor has returned to address Santa Barbara County. And with that, I welcome you to settle in and listen. So welcome, Dr. Pastor.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank everybody for being here today virtually. So a couple things. First, I'm in this beautiful office in downtown Los Angeles. Beautiful because it's got a great view, but beautiful because my staff decorated it because tomorrow it's my birthday. And they have a little thing here. It's my birthday. Isn't that cute? And there's signs all over. I didn't realize they actually liked me. So this is like a big achievement. I wanted to say before I get started, and I'm going to turn to what Michelle took us on, is that if I'm speaking, people who've heard me speak before will know this, and I'm a bit halting in the way that I speak. It's not because I'm trying to be deliberately sort of heavy and meaningful, although maybe that's it. But I have a speech condition called spasmodic dysphonia, spasms around the voice box. And one way to kind of get through it is to speak a little bit more deliberately, also to have it treated. This condition is now famous because it's the condition that Robert Kennedy Jr. has. If you've ever heard him speak, you know his voice is very scratchy. If my voice was not treated, I would sound like Robert Kennedy Jr. I would not be as delusional as Robert Kennedy Jr. because that's a bar that's pretty hard to reach and jump over. But I would sound like him. So please bear with this voice. You know, Michelle was saying something I think very deep about this moment that we're in the way that it causes stress, anxiety, and for the lives of many of the parents whose children you serve, great fear. Because in particular, of the moves around enforcing immigration laws within the country. And we'll see that that has special resonance when we look at the data for Santa Barbara County. But it's also the case that it's very important for all of us to recognize the multiplicity of reactions. A couple days after the election, I called a good friend who is a leading community organizer in California and asked him what he was thinking, what he was feeling, perhaps the most important for all of us, what are we rethinking? And he said something very interesting, which is he said, well, I go through the stages of grief rather rapidly. So he'd actually moved from being disconcerted and disoriented to being very action oriented. And many of us are like that. We move immediately to what we can and should do without fully grappling with the fact that there are many valid reactions. And being paralyzed, being fearful, being concerned is another very valid reaction. So for those of you who are go-getters, have patience. I have a dear cousin who passed away, who when difficult things happened, said, well, it was just another personal growth experience. She actually said, it's another effing personal growth experience, because she had a colorful way of speaking. But for those of us who think it's just another personal growth experience, realize that the way that we grow through it is different. And we need to welcome these different reactions. What I want to do today, and I'm going to share a presentation because economists do not know how to speak without PowerPoints. We're sort of lost without PowerPoints. Let me bring this up. I started to and move it to presentation mode. And Brianna, can you nod if you're seeing the presentation? Great. I want to contextualize the moment that we're in with the way in which the news changes every day. Is the tariff rate today 145% or 50%? Is Harvard getting international students or is it not getting at international students? Is authoritarianism on the rise or no, it's totally on the rise. There's no doubt about that. It's very easy to think and be moved by what's happening moment to moment and not realize that this actually is building on tremendous amount of uncertainty and whiplash that's been going on for some time. The financial crash of 2008, 2009, that did not just shipwreck the fortunes of so many low-income families who were the last to get into the home buying spree and the first to be hit by the foreclosure crisis, but also the crisis of faith in our capitalist economic system that it triggered when we saw the titans of finance who said that they could control the market and make it work. Watch all of that melt and the government instead step in to rescue them from their mistakes, but not rescue so many of our families from their misfortunes. Big crisis, which then led to the election of Barack Obama and a few seconds of hope and change, or hope for change, that immediately was greeted by a Tea Party backlash that even doubted the authenticity of Obama's citizenship, that led to a lack of faith in government, which eventually led to the election of Trump the first time, which took everyone by surprise, including Trump himself, if you watched his so-called acceptance speech, where he looked more like a deer in the headlights the first time, because he too did not think he would win. We went through the tremendous whipsaw of that period only to wind up having a crisis that shut down the nation for a year, maybe longer, that threatened people, that even daily contact that you had thought was innocuous could instead be dangerous for those who were not yet inoculated. And that crisis led also to some ways in which we came together, but also some ways in which we were divided. And it, like the financial crisis, was a moment in which the disease revealed our illnesses as a society, the lack of healthcare, the lack of legal status, the lack of wealth, so that some people had nothing to fall back on when the economy rose up. That crisis was accompanied by the moment of racial reckoning after the murder of George Floyd, and of course, an enormous whiplash since that led to the election of Trump a second time, a broad attack on DEI that had been brought forward by the racial reckoning. Just yesterday, the announcement that COVID vaccines would no longer be recommended for children or for pregnant women. Uh, that is a tremendous uh, set of turmoil and change. And so it's important to focus in on the last 4 months, which have certainly been tumultuous, but to recognize that this moment of stress that Michelle was pointing to has been built on decades of trauma. Now, those long-term trends that led to so much of this have to do first with the demographic change in the country, which led so many people to call for a racial reckoning and so many to be scared of it. They have to do with tremendous income inequality, which was cast into stark relief by the financial crisis and by the economic fallout of the COVID crisis. And they have to do with a crisis of faith in our institutions. So let's think a little bit about those and actually zoom in a bit on Santa Barbara County as we do so. So first, long term, the big demographic change in the country is its shift to becoming majority people of color by about the year 2045. And it is a change that some welcome, thinking about the multiplicity of cultures and experiences and the diversity of our lives that will be enhanced by new people with different food, different music, different opportunities. And of course, it has also created tremendous fear for some who feel that their America is slipping away from them. And that change in the United States, which you could see here from about the year 2000, going from being about 69% non-Hispanic white to being about 47% non-Hispanic white in 2050, is the demographic change that California went through between 1980 and 2000. In many ways, California was America fast forward. And for those of you who are both a bit older and conscious during that period, you remember how we were rocked by Proposition 187 and the anti-immigrant sentiment, by really a rejection then of what was considered to be DEI, the elimination of affirmative action, the banning of bilingual education, the adoption of three strikes laws that were clearly targeting Black and brown youth, that is a kind of racial reaction that presaged what is going on in the United States right now. I look at Michelle and Wendy. I know they remember. I look at Lexi and Brianna. Girls, you should read my book about this state of resistance. It's all you need. Um, but so we've been through this in California, and we know that you can come out on the other side. But the rest of the nation is fearful of that. And you could see what it looks like in Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara, its demographic change, it was a lot whiter than the state in 1980. It's kind of moved to being closer to the state in the last decade or so. The really sharply growing population and continuing to grow is the Latino population, diminishing the non-Hispanic white population, a the slowly decreasing share that is Black, but an important Black community, slightly growing Asian population. But this actually distinguishes you just a little bit, because if we go back to California, the Latino population is growing pretty slowly in the state of California. It's on a more steady march within Santa Barbara County. Why is that? In part because people are moving away from LA, they're moving away from the Bay Area, they're even moving more profoundly to inland California, Central Valley, Inland Empire, etc., but also growing in the Central Coast. Now, what's interesting about that is that people think that what is driving the change in demographically in the United States is immigration. And certainly, if you listen to the public discourse around immigration and the sharpened fear and anxiety, you would think that was the main driver of our demographic change. But it isn't. Between 1990 and about the Obama years, well, actually between 1990 and about 2000, fairly sizable increase in the share of the United States that was immigrant continued to increase by about the same 2 percentage points between 2000 and 2010, but barely an increase between 2010 and 2010 and 2020. What's been interesting is that the hysteria around immigration has increased even as immigration itself, except for the last couple of years, didn't really increase into the United States. So why has this political reaction been there? Part of it has been the relocation of the immigrant population within the United States. So in 1990, about a third of all immigrants in the United States lived in California. Now it's around 22%. Immigrants are no longer coming into California as much as they are going to Georgia and North Carolina and other places that have not had an immigrant presence. And also, many migrants who have lived in California are moving to other states. They are saying that they might not like me in Texas, but I can buy a home there. And what that's meant is that the sort of immigrant shock that created the Prop 187 political reaction in California, that immigrant shock is occurring in other parts of the country now as well. And you could see that in another way. By the way, Michelle knows this well, that I love data. I love graphs. I could see Wendy smiling. I think she likes them as well. And they know that I will always bring new graphs and that I will always try to convince those of you who believe it's just about stories that numbers are your friends, that numbers can help make important cases, including one I'm about to make for First Five in a minute. But you could see what I was talking about by looking at a really interesting data point. The share of the nation's immigrants who arrived in the last 5 years. So meaning the really recent migrants. Before we were looking at all migrants, these are the really recent migrants. In 1980, about a third of all the most recent migrants came to California. Now it's only about 15%. And they're not going to New York where they used to go, or Illinois, a little bit to New Jersey, but to Florida, to Texas, to elsewhere, mostly the South. So that's why we are getting the political reaction we are. What does that look like locally? A couple of things that I think are really important for you to consider. One is that the share of the population that is foreign born is continuing to increase slightly in the country. It's actually stabilizing in California. It's going down a little bit in uh, Santa Barbara County. Why is that? What's really going on is that the demographic changes you'll see in a minute is driven not so much by migrants as by their children. You could see that in Santa Barbara County, if you compare the share of the Latino population that is US born to the share of the Latino population that is immigrant, the share of the Latino population that is US born is about twice the share of the Latino population that is immigrant. So increasingly, you've got settled populations that have children, first 5 children. And you could see that in California, and we'll go to Santa Barbara in a minute, by looking at the undocumented population in California. It's about 2.8 million. But what is fascinating is about 2.7 million US citizens live with undocumented family members. And then another 700,000 basically green card holders live with undocumented family members. So what's important for you to realize is that the number of US citizen and lawful residents who are family members outnumber the number of undocumented residents. So it's mixed status families. That's the legacy and part of the reason why. Here's a great and startling fact. Of undocumented residents in California, more than 2/3 have been in the country for more than a decade. They've settled in, they've formed families, they are undocumented Californians. And we need to shift our language because when you start to think about people as undocumented Californians, you understand they're rooted here, they're not going anywhere, they have families, and they belong to our community. What does this look like in Santa Barbara? Very similarly, your undocumented Santa Barbara residents are outnumbered by the U.S. citizen family members that live with them, and lawful residents, I'm sorry, putting those two together, that live with them. And here is the most startling stat from your point of view. If you look at the first 5 population, which in our particular case we define as 0 to 5, 30% of the first 5 population in Santa Barbara County have at least one undocumented parent. That is, by the way, higher than the state and higher than a lot of our major metro areas. Why is that? Think about your industries. You've got agriculture and you've got tourism and service. So you have a lot of undocumented workers who have been here for a while because those industries have been here for a while and they've got kids. And those kids come home every day worried about whether their parents will still be there, whether they will have been separated. That's stress, that's anxiety, that's part of our collective work. Getting back to the data, one interesting thing for you to note, and then we'll go past the demographics to a little bit of the economics, is the change in the youth population between 2000 and 2023. So, as I mentioned, what's really driving our shift in the shares, white, Latino, etc., is the uh, change in the youth population. Now, when we look at change in the youth population, we're asking about the population that's 0 to 17. So when you look at this decline of 1.3 million young whites, it's important to keep in mind that's not young white people dying. That surely would have been noticed. Rather, it's young whites moving into 18 and 19, graduating out of the cohort, not as many moving into 0 and 1. And you could see that there's been a big decline in the state of young whites, some decline in the state of young Black Californians, but some of that redesignation is multiracial, increase in Latinos and AAPI. What's fascinating is if you break that down a little bit by decade, because this is 2000 to 2023, you'll notice a very interesting phenomena, which is the odds brought a big increase in the number of young Latinos, but the teens have brought a decrease. Why is that? There's two main drivers. One, again, our immigrants are much more long settled, and the longer migrants are here, the more their family formation patterns become like the US, just barely reproducing yourself with 2 kids, which is what my wife and I have done. And now they are 38 and 35, and they don't have grandkids, which we view as a major tragedy. So anything you could do for my birthday to wish for grandkids for me would be deeply appreciated. I'll send the emails of my children. You could send them notes about how disappointed their parents are, what their obligations are. So anyway, back to the data. We've got both the difference in family formation patterns and high housing prices, which are forcing young families out. So this is a very interesting breakdown of the phenomena. But what it means, for example, in Santa Barbara County, is that we've got a big, and this is really much bigger than other counties, difference in the median age. Median age is half older, half younger. The median age of white folks in Santa Barbara County is 45. The median age for AAPI, about 36. For Black, about 35. For Latino, 28. 45, 28, it's 17 years. You experience this in your daily lives. But what it means is that there's a generation gap, which a lot of older white Santa Barbarans feel disassociated from a younger population and don't recognize their interdependency, a word I'll come back to. And part of what First Five needs to do is to figure out how to serve young kids and their families, but also how to build the connective tissue so that people see this as part of the future of the county. Now, all of these demographic shifts have happened against a backdrop of tremendous economic inequality. This graph shows, let's just focus on the dark blue line, income, the share of national income going to the top 1%, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s. Top 1% was getting about 10% of national income. As you could see, since about 1980, since about the Reagan administration, the share of national income has been on a volatile but steady drift upwards. So now about 25% of national income goes to the top 1%. The 1% has run away from the rest, and scrambling behind them is a professional middle class hoping to hang on. But often hoping to hang on behind gated communities, private schools, and a disassociation with the rest of us. Again, spelling disconnection. You could see some of that, skip over this slide, by looking at real income growth by percentile. This is the share in for full-time year-round workers, their real wages. So this is not the top 1%, but people who are working for a living. But folks who are at the 90th percentile, meaning 10% make more, 90% make less, 80th, 20% make more, 80 make less, etc. What you could see, blue, United States, is that income has risen at the top of the wage distribution, fallen at the bottom. But if you look at the orange, California, you could see that that process has been on steroids in California. And it's been pretty exacerbated in Santa Barbara as well. So that here, the blue is Santa Barbara, big increases for those who are probably more educated, more into professional jobs, big falls for those who are not. So a widening divide. And that divide has had racial aspects as well. This shows median household income by race and ethnicity. You could see here, if you look at household income, white households make more than black households, more than Latino households, about the same as Asian American households. What is interesting is to look at this data, which we will now. Same vertical axis, same groups, but looking at families raising children under the age of 5. And what you'll see is that those income gaps, particularly between white and Latino, exacerbate. So white households raising children under the age of 5 make more than 2 times what Latino households raising children under the age of 5. So we are currently baking inequality in. And these are public policy issues that the band-aids of services cannot fully address. That policies that certainly have to do with helping children need to be there, but policies that also help their parents need to be there. It's harder because little kids are cuter than day laborers. But day laborers, nannies, hotel cleaners, or someone's parents. And the fortune of those children will be determined in part by the fortune of their parents. One important thing to realize is that education is part of it. This is for California. What you could see is as you move from being less educated to being more highly educated, wages rise. But it's important to note that at each and every level of education, you could see that there's significant racial gaps. In fact, the only gap that closes with education is the gap between white and Asians for those with a BA or higher. But for every other education level, there's a wage penalty for being a person of color in the state of California. Why is that? Some of it's discrimination, particularly for African American job seekers. Some of it's uncertainty around immigration status that penalizes Latinos in particular. For many groups, it's the lack of networks to well-paying jobs. Who you know makes a difference to where you go in the labor market. So these are issues to take on. And I'm just going to skip over here and start talking about what I think we need to do in these times of uncertainty. Because what I'd like to suggest to you is that behind the political polarization, behind the fear of demographic change, behind the tolerance of such persistent inequality by class, by race, is fundamentally disconnection. That we have shifted from an attitude of there, but for the grace of God go I, to an attitude of I'm glad that's not me. That is to look at someone who might be unhoused and think not of generosity, but of our own fortune to not be that person, to think of a community that's over policed and feel like, well, that makes me safe. To think of a family ripped apart by immigration enforcement and instead wonder what the benefit might be for someone else. So we really need to repair our disconnection. And in order to do that, I think there's a couple things that we need to do. First, I think we need to offer a new take on race and identity. I don't mean shy away from it, which I think some people think is the answer. I mean something else. I think that as we talk about race and identity, we need to be data oriented in terms of the consequences. I presented a lot of that today. We need to be forward looking about the demographic changes that are coming and what they mean for all of us. We need to recognize that people have multiple selves. You can be white and not have a lot of privilege. You can be Latino and indigenous and Black at the same time. For all of us, we are not just one identity. How do we open a conversation about multiple selves? How do we have face to face conversations. And how do we not shy away, but focus in on calling people in versus calling people out? Not trying to correct someone who's not woke, but instead trying to have a conversation that can awaken. So I think we need a different take on this. I think we need a new focus on interdependency. These charts get at this in two different ways. Chart on the right, it's one of my favorites because it's animated, but also because of the story that it tells. Demographers have always traditionally talked about a demographic pyramid. And by a demographic pyramid, they mean lots of young people, less working and middle age, and much less older folks. Because as we age, even if it is my birthday, the prospect of not being on this planet becomes more likely. But what you can see in the United States is that we've moved from a demographic pyramid, which you could see in 1950, to a demographic cylinder 2060. Less young kids being born, less immigrants filling in the middle, and healthcare that's prolonging our lives. What that means is that we are actually more reliant on young people that we underinvest in to be productive in the future, to be able to pay for more of our Social Security, Medicare, etc. We're actually more dependent on immigrants because we need folks to take care of our elders and our young. And some of that interdependence is revealed in this chart. This looks at employment in high-tech services versus employment in nursing, elder, family, home, health, and childcare services. And what you can see here is that yes, high tech is important, but it's not growing as rapidly and it's not as big as the care industry. Why? Because software engineers need an army of nannies and gardeners and food service workers and folks to take care of their families. So we need to talk a lot more about interdependence. We need accountability. People are asking us for data. They're asking us whether programs work. To do that, just a few data sources. Much of what I have talked to you about today is in the National Equity Atlas, a website we maintain with Policy Link from Oakland. A whole other part of it is in California Immigrant Data Portal, which is something we maintain, which has data on immigrants, including by status. What else do we need? I think we need a new economic narrative. And that new economic narrative needs to highlight a few things, some of which are in the book that Michelle mentioned, Solidarity Economics. Needs to highlight that it's our economy, not the economy. Needs to highlight the interdependence, that your focus on young kids is not just about inclusion and equity, but it's because when those young kids do well, the future for all of us thrives. Those of us who fight for equity need to wave the prosperity flag. That what we're really talking about is investments in overall well-being. Too often we get pigeonholed as just being concerned about particular groups. We need new policies, but what I want to do is to close with a couple of final thoughts and a story. First, I hope that this talk has at least communicated that while you might feel stressed about the last 4 months, about the moment that we're in, that if you had your ear to the ground, you would have heard the rumbling a long time ago. The disruption, the fear, the anxiety, and the social disconnection that has led to this polarization. So we are in the midst of fundamental transformation. What's at stake is everything. So what we do in this moment will be counted for a long time in our history books to come. That because of this, we need to have a vision and we need to focus on a conversation to engage people and not a conversion to fool them into joining your side, but an actual listening to what concerns are and how we remake. But let me end with this story, and I'll actually go from the slides. This advertises, by the way, all my cool books, which many of you definitely should buy. But let me just tell you a story. Like others in this area, we were affected by a small climate event you might have heard of that occurred in January, the wildfires. We live in Pasadena. Our family home was okay. But we own a rental property in North Pasadena, right on the border of Altadena. We bought it so that my daughter could live in the little casita in the back. She is embarking on a career as a social worker. And like many of you who've embarked on that career, high wages are not necessarily a part. So thought it a good idea to buy a rental where she could live in the back. On the morning of the fire, she'd evacuated the night before. She shot me a ring picture. Dad, the fences of houses, 2 houses down are on fire. Just at that moment, the front tenant, Luis, arrived, called me as well, said, "Wow, there's fire right down the street." And then quickly, "Oh, wow, there's fire in the backyard." He and his father-in-law, Arturo, who had just lost his house hours before, about 5 or 6 blocks away, rushed to the backyard with buckets of water and with a hose. Neighbors came over. I don't know how they found so many hoses, strung them together. One neighbor broke through a fence, brought over a hose, and managed to put out a fire that consumed a carport, 3 cars, storage shed, 3 of our fences. My wife Showed up about half an hour after this. I showed up about 45 minutes later. We were in different parts of LA that morning. We joined the neighborhood brigade, moving from backyard to backyard, and sometimes house to house, putting out fires as they kept popping up. 3 or 4 houses down. Fire department was staging a last and valiant stand. Eventually, in our neighborhood, about half the houses burned. One funny moment was when I was in our backyard trying to put out a fire that was coming back up. Fireman walked by. I said, "Be great if you guys come over here." And he looked at me and said, "Looks like you have it together," and kept on walking. But it was quite an experience. And I learned 3 things from it that I'll share. First, sometimes when there's a fire, you got to rush to it. Second, it's better to go there with your neighbors and your friends to figure out alliances and networks. And third, to never forget that it's much better if the government is not throwing gasoline on it, but is actually trying to put out the fire as well. We are in a world of fires right now. I urge you to feel your feelings, to understand the stress, but to figure out how you can rush to the need, how you can recruit your friends and neighbors and allies and people who are part of this first 5 family, and how you can understand that working with the government to do good is one of our highest callings to protect our communities. Thank you. Hope this was helpful.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Perster. That was absolutely inspirational and thoughtful, thought-provoking, all of those things that you said, many things that you said. I'm so glad that it is recorded in that sense. And I have some questions that we're going to take this time to answer some of the questions. Some came in earlier and some that have came in through the live chat. So thank you for those questions that are there. And what I'm seeing here and what you're saying, you said many things, and we'll have to do a wordle of what all this really means in the sense of, but what caught my curiosity was that staying curious and being patient about what we have to do. Just as we've said, sometimes y'all can all rush to the fire, but sometimes you have to go with people. So it's about being patient and staying curious about it. And the 3 C's wasn't about a diamond, carrot, cut, or clarity. It was really about communication, connection, and courage. And I think if we're going to reach interdependence, we're going to need all 3 of those to be able to do that. So thank you for saying that. And so I want to get to our questions real quickly here. One of the questions that came up, creating impactful change often means creating lots of tension with decision makers and influential people. What advice do you offer change makers in our region who often feel held back by avoiding the creation of tension and holding decision makers accountable to really meeting the needs of the community?
There are many great questions in the Q&A, and of course, this is one. The advice I'd give is to try to figure out how to connect face to face, even with some of the people that you might find yourself in conflict and in opposition with, because they might be on your side later. And so it's really not just, it's also not transactional, but trying to see the humanness in the person that you might wind up being in conflict with. Doesn't mean you change your strategy. Doesn't mean you change your values. I still remember I was once asked to testify for a living wage ordinance in Los Angeles, and I came forward to do that, and everybody quote unquote on my side was surprised that I sat down with the head of the LA Economic Development Corporation. At that time, they were opposing this. It's an interesting answer to the story. They said, "Well, why did you sit down with him?" I said, "Well, we had stuff to talk about, our families. Plus, he actually wants to create jobs. He doesn't think this is the right way, but he wants to create jobs. He wants to save industry. Um, and I'm going to be winding up talking to him later. I'm glad we won." Here's the interesting thing. 15 years later, the LA Economic Development Corporation, when the county of LA decided to move to its $15 an hour minimum wage, came, presented research, showed that it would not be damaging, and did not oppose it. So I think it's a question of how we conflict with integrity, with respect, and with a sense that you might come together again.
Thank you. This is one of our live questions. You talked about this earlier, and one question is, what is the difference between U.S. citizen and lawful residents?
U.S. citizen is someone who's either born in the United States or has gone through a naturalization process. To go through a naturalization process, you have to have legal permission to be in the country, and that legal permission, you have to have had it for at least 5 years. A lawful resident is someone who's got a green card, so they have legal permission to be in the country. By the way, it can also be someone who's got a student visa or what's called an H-1B visa. Those are often high-tech workers, but they're not permanent residents.
Thank you. In California, we talked about our region in California. California is known for not backing down and for leading how America moves forward. How can we continue that leadership without risking alienation from the current administration and the rest of the country? And what language should we use in doing so?
Um, I think it's not possible to avoid targeting by this administration. So I think there's a difference between being reckless and being courageous. But I think it's not possible to avoid targeting. If you watch, this is definitely an administration that seems to believe in ready, fire, aim. It's just not very well informed or seemingly triggered. So what I think California needs to do is to be both courageous and generous. The generosity comes, I think, in listening to why moving in a different direction is appealing to some. It's striking if you look at the uh, movement in voters. The sharpest movement was with Latino men. Some of that anti-blackness, some of that misogyny. And those are things to talk about, to lift up, to work on. But complaining about those is a little bit like complaining about smog in Los Angeles. It's like that's also part of the background that's always there that we need to be resisting. But do people talk about stuff in a plain spoken, and accessible way. Ask yourself a question. How many big, fancy words did I use today? How many times did I sound rhetorical? How many times was I not accessible? How many times did I not try to be funny to try to bring people into the conversation rather than scare them away? So I think that's generosity. And then, frankly, I think we have a special role in California in reeling in the techno authoritarians. I think we've thought about technology as liberating and Silicon Valley as liberal, but particularly with artificial intelligence and with the soaring egos, not eagles, but egos of so many of our tech leaders who think that they know much more than anyone else, that they could go into a federal government and quickly wring out $2 trillion in savings in 180 days. Like, you got to think a lot of yourself and very little about everyone else. So I think we have a special role in California about educating our elites. That the reason they thrive here is not because they're free to do whatever they want, but because we invested in the UC system, because we supported Stanford, because there's a community college system that trains their programmers, because we made sure that Santa Clara County was protected environmentally, so it's a good place to live, so that engineers do want to live there. That Santa Clara County, depending on the year, has the highest share of undocumented workers of any county in California because they need those workers too. So I think we have a special role of lifting up that message as well.
Thank you. So this is going to be a two-part question. I'll combine a couple of questions because they're kind of getting at the same time. You know, early in your presentation, you also talked about lived experience or experience. And so this question is about how do you respond to people who focus so much on storytelling and want less emphasis on quantitative data? Both are very vital, but how do you protect that, the integrity and importance of quantitative data, and call folks in to see the importance of numbers too? How do you balance those two? And the second part of the other question is, how do you take the data that you shared with us today from 0 to 18, and how do we use that data or analyze that data to show the impact of children 0 to 5?
Yeah. So first, I don't think that. So Julie Su, who was the Labor Secretary of California, who was the acting Labor Secretary of the United States in the last couple of years of President Biden, once said the nicest thing about me. She said, "You're California's data poet." And I think that one of the things that we need to do is to connect data to stories. So we need to make sure that the data sings. We need to make sure that we provide an interpretation. And we need to help people who think that data doesn't matter understand when it can make a difference and what audience it can make a difference with. So, the business sector is an important ally around childhood care and education because you all get their workers to work and you all prepare the next generation. Now, the challenge is getting business to agree to help pay for that. But in certain unexpected places, that has happened. For example, San Antonio, Texas. The Chamber of Commerce led the charge for a special tax to fund early childhood education with a priority on underrepresented Black and Latino kids because they sought data about who was their future labor force. And they were unromantic about that. But I think working side by side with people who are perhaps more values driven, values rubbed off on them, and data rubbed off on the equity proponents. So I think we need to weave these two things together.
I'm going to weave a couple of questions together too. I know we're nearing the time. I want to make sure that folks who've taken the time to put their questions in so that I can get to them. First, do you believe in trickle-down economics 2.0, that we are in that at this point? And how do we address that wealth gap? I know you started to speak a little bit about that, and it almost looks like a Grand Canyon in terms of the data that we're doing, and that it's reflecting reality. And the second question I would ask to combine with that is that the concern about increasing exclusivity in education, especially especially trending public investments in parochial schools based on court decisions, and how can we best counteract it or address it or talk about it?
You know, the challenge with trickle down economics is the following. Our brains are kind of wired to think that it must make sense. That is, we are so educated that, you know, the rich invest, that drives our economy, that's what moves things forward. But if you look at the economic performance over the last 40 years, since we went to trickle down economics with President Reagan, much slower growth, much wider inequality, much more government debt, no evidence that tax cuts pay for themselves. In fact, the Congressional Research Service put out a study that showed that, and it was not allowed to be published by the Republican Congress. So do I think it's going to finally work this time? No. Here's what I think makes sense. I am lucky enough to have an endowed chair. In fact, if I didn't have this background, you'd be able to see behind me the actual physical chair they gave me. But the endowed chair actually also came with a bunch of money. And I asked the guy who made all the money, who, by the way, was a center-right Republican, really liked me. I really liked him. Generosity, conversation across difference. I said, Jerry, how did you make so much money? He said, well, I treated my customers right. I treated my workers right. I treated my suppliers right. And the business worked out. That's common sense economics. You know that if you're trying to shortchange everyone around you, you're not building team. You're not building community. You're not building sustainable business relationships. We need that kind of an economic frame. And I think that sort of story is what will help us get forward and make the broader case. You know, and I'll end with this. This is about how you go to the right conversation. Early April, when President Trump announced so-called Liberation Day, high tariffs. Much of the conversation became around tariffs. Are they good? Are they bad? When should you use them? I thought that was the wrong conversation. Because that announcement was not about a tool. It was a declaration against global interdependence. It was saying, we don't need the rest of the world. And sometimes when we do, like we need your stuff more than you need ours, that it's bad. That declaration against global interdependence has a parallel with the declaration against domestic interdependence. We don't need immigrants. We don't need poor people. We don't need this next generation of kids. That actually answers your last question. Our kids went to public schools. And actually often schools that some other parents would not send their kids to. Partly because my wife worked there. And we needed to walk the talk. But also because what's good enough for your kids is good enough for my kids. And I need to make sure that if I think it's good enough for my kids, that I'm fighting to make sure that the schools are the standard I want. Because that's the standard I want for your kids. I don't want an escape. I want a community.
Dr. Peister, thank you so much for your time today. As we conclude this Ed Talk, we could go on for that. Maybe we'll have to come back again, shouting that out to you, Brianna. So I also want to say thank you, Brianna, for certainly putting this together, and all the team that has in the background doing all the pulling of the switches and levers to make it go smoothly. And certainly thank you, the public who have joined us today. First Five, it is an honor for us to host these very good conversations. We really is firming the foundation for our children, firming the foundation for our families, and therefore our communities. And I'll just conclude with as Dr. Pastore said, that the interdependence, we got to stay courageous, we got to stay in community, we have to stay in community, in conversation, and let us be data oriented, forward looking, understanding our multi selves, and do have conversations face to face, and stay solidarity orientation. Thank you so much for joining us today. Enjoyed it. So thank you. We were so privileged to be here, and thank you all for your time and sharing conversation with First Five today. Ed Talk. Have a nice day.